Marin fell to their knees as the iron strap bit into the back of their skull. A guard tightened the bolt while a vendor shouted at the crowd to make room. Shame drove Marin's hands to claw at the leather strap, not out of vanity, but to stop the hands from tearing the brass locket from their throat. The square smelled of cold stew and wet wool. People pushed forward to see the mask fastened into place, and the locket snapped free like a small, exposed nerve. Marin remembered the morning they had last closed the locket. 2 coins pressed into the metal, a name once inscribed and now rubbed smooth, so shame moved every reflex in the square more than fear did. The documentary narrator records the moment with the same bluntness as the magistrate's clerk records signatures. The narrator notes dates, times, and object conditions while Marin's fingers bled where the strap had cut. In those first moments, the central problem was visible, a municipal program designed to remove a person's social name and make the body itself pronounce guilt. Guards pushed Marin forward. A child threw a rotten apple. Someone spat. Marin tried to say their name once, a sound choked by the metal, and the captain of guards drew his baton across the mask to make the public understand silence was part of the sentence. Marin pressed their tongue against the inside of the mask and tasted iron and the memory of the locket's cool brass. Shame forced Marin to look for any sign that someone recognized them. Every averted gaze narrowed the room inside Marin's head into one repeating fact: name gone, roll erased. After the market, Magistrate Ulrich watched from a raised stool while a clerk read aloud the ordinance. Ulrich tapped the ceremonial chain against his chest as the clerk announced the regulations for public masks and their penalties. Ulrich, the clerk said. And Ulrich cocked his head. Ulrich, names must not be spoken during parade. And any removal attempts meet immediate retribution. Marin heard the proclamation as if it landed on their face through the mask. A legal seal that made the iron permanent in law. In the municipal hall later that evening, Ulrich folded the sealed order under his palm while masksmith Thomas laid out drawings of hinged flanges and internal tooth catches. Thomas set a blunt steel latch on the table and ran a file along a hingotomus. Ulrich, make it tight. Make removal ruin the jaw or the eyes. Thomas ran a gloved hand over the hing and replied in measured workman's speech, it will hold, magistrate. The edge will seal to skin if needed. The tension moved from the square into the plans. This was not improvisation, but design. Thomas tested a small model against a block of oak, and then against a rag the color of Marin's shift. He hammered a rivet with a single controlled strike. The clerk rubbed ink on the margin of the orders and stamped the wax. In the hall, Ulrich's voice never rose. He spoke like a man arranging ledgers. Ulrich, order recorded, the clerk said. Ulrich nodded and the seal snapped. The work continued with hands and tools, not rhetoric. They brought Marin to the vault before dawn. A damp smell hit the face of the condemned as the iron door groaned. An old prisoner with a missing front tooth watched Marin struggle with the strap and offered one sentence. Names don't save you here, child. Marin answered with a look, fingertips pressing the inside of the mask until the metal hummed with blood. The old man pointed to a shelf where a ledger lay beneath a tally of dates. Marin touched the ledger the first night with numb fingers. The ink listed names and the small marks beside each entry tallies that did not tally crimes but something else, a symbol repeated by Ulrich's hand. The discovery shifted Marin's sense of the event from single punishment to system. There was a motive visible on the paper, vendetta and order mixed into municipal procedure. Marin memorized one-page names, marks, dates, and kept that memorization like a sliver of something held close to the ribs. Morning brought inspection. Captain of guards leaned in and said, Marin, tell us your trade. Marin tried to answer, but the mask muffled vowels into rasp. The captain barked at a soldier to adjust the straps. Captain, tighten it 3 notches. Magistrate Ulrich without looking up from a small brass tablet held like a mirror. Marin watched Ulrich's face for any sign of pity and saw only the double chin and the small mole on the left temple compress into intent. Marin's jaw clenched within the mask. Shame shifted to doubt. Was Marin being punished for a real crime, or for a private mark Ulrich kept in a ledger? That doubt turned into a slow knot of anger when the captain brushed Marin's sleeve as if Marin were a tool. Thomas returned for the fitting ritual. He carried a tray with small clamps, hinges, and a key that turned like a watch. Marin tried to struggle and the captain forced their arms behind them, the iron biting into wrists. Thomas, hold still, Marin. This is a careful piece. Marin heard the name and tried to hold on to the sense of being a person rather than an exhibit. Shame moved into fear as Thomas locked the internal teeth and the last bolt clicked into place. Marin's cheek scraped metal and a sound like bone against steel made Marin close their eyes even though the mask already covered them. Thomas tightened one hinge, then another. The captain pressed the key into the lock and turned it once. The turn felt like a sentence spoken and sealed. Thomas, seal the edges, Ulrich instructed. Thomas applied a waxed leather strip along the rim that would irritate skin over days. Marin swallowed and the interior of the mask filled with the taste of metal and breath. The sound of the captain's boots on stone matched the slowness of a calendar page. Marin's body began to index time through small H's, the ridge of the nose forced inward, a hairline scab forming where a rivet caught a cheek. The parade began at noon. Marin walked between two guards through narrow streets where neighbors pulled curtains and shut shutters as if closing windows against disease. Children were pushed forward on parents' shoulders to laugh or point. Someone behind Marin laughed and called out, "Look at the mask!" The captain nudged Marin forward with the butt of his staff until Marin's feet scraped along the cobbles. The public ritual of humiliation was designed to make each passerby take part in erasure. Along the road Marin caught brief gestures. A woman pressed a hand to a child's mouth. A baker turned his head away. Those small refusals built a wall around Marin where recognition was forbidden by law and enforced by Ulrich's signatures. Marin's fingers tracked the inside of the mask and found the empty place where the locket had been torn free. The absence of the locket was a concrete, tactile thing, the thread burned into the skin of the neck, a raw circle of cloth. Marin's shame tightened into a new movement, resolve to find the ledger, to prove this was not only punishment but personal targeting. Back in the vault at night, Marin and the old prisoner worked quietly, while the rain tapped the roof above. Marin had learned how to move despite the mask, place the palm flat for balance, breathe through a small gap over the teeth guard, keep the head still. The old prisoner slid a candle closer and pointed at the ledger so Marin could read the faded ink. "Old prisoner, they keep a mark by certain names," he said. Marin traced the marks and snapped the candle wick with hands that trembled. 2 pages down, Marin found a mark beside 3 names they recognized, neighbors who had argued with Ulrich months earlier. One name had a tiny notation. Personal. Marin felt a sudden clarity, a shift from doubt to anger. The shift showed in Marin's jaw. The hands went from shaking to steady. Marin whispered, "They chose people they disliked." The old prisoner clicked his tongue and said, "Ulrich picks names like a butcher picks meat. You must keep this safe." That exchange moved the plot. Marin now had a fragile reason to resist. Marin's attempt at resistance came hours later in the rain-slick alley. The mask scraped a raw ring along Marin's temple. Marin ran until the captain's whistle sounded behind them, and then ducked into an alley where water ran across the cobbles. Marin used the wet leather strap to test the hinge, hands working with a desperation that prioritized small gains. Loosen one rivet, force one gap over grand plans. The rain made each movement slippery, and the metal sang with each attempt. The captain found Marin, breath loud and tactical, and grabbed the back of the mask. "Captain, hold him," the guard snarled. Marin pulled at the flange and felt a rip of skin. Pain roared as the strap pulled, but the metal kept hold. Marin's body convulsed. The interior of the mask filled with a sound like tearing cloth. A neighbor nearby slammed a shutter and did not come out. Marin's attempt did not free the face but broke 2 teeth on the mask and sent a shard of iron across their cheek. Marin sank to the wet street, while the captain pressed a torch to the hinge to show the neighbors the danger of interference. The torchlight made the metal glow and everyone stepped back. Marin tasted blood and the metal smell of the altered hinge. The captain read a short list from his notes and said, "Ulrich ordered no removal." Ulrich, this one tried to escape the chant of Ulrich's name in accusation, was a mechanism to extend shame into the public record. Marin's action had become a public spectacle of suffering rather than a liberation. The next morning the documentary narrator catalogued injuries in an objective register: laceration on left cheek, fractured tooth, partial detachment of locket chain. The narrator recorded the ledger's page number and the wax impression of Ulrich's seal. The voice remained detached and methodical. Facts, dates, damage. Marin's body was a list for the record. The ledger and the narrator together made the event official. Ulrich convened a short hearing in his chamber the same day. Ulrich folded the ledger beneath his palm and called for the captain and Thomas Ulrich. "Explain the removal attempt," the clerk recited. The captain tossed a damp scrap on the table and said, "Captain, the condemned tried to force the flange open. We applied restraint and the mask suffered." Thomas added, "Thomas, the hinge bent, but the interior teeth held. It will scar if left." Ulrich tapped the ledger with one finger and chose a punishment that fit his mark: increased parade, public ledger update, and a note to the masksmith to file edges to add irritation. The clerk stamped the additional order and slid it under Ulrich's seal. Marin was brought in on a stretcher and set down before the table so Ulrich could inspect the face through the mask. Marin's eyes burned from tears trapped behind metal. Ulrich's gaze moved over the wounds and then to the ledger. "Ulrich, this is necessary," he said. Ulrich, order enforced. Marin could read the movement of his jaw through the mask and, without hearing the words directly, felt the legal weight shift against them. In the vault that night, Marin tested the edge of one broken tooth on the mask and found a sliver of the brass locket lodged there. The presence of the locket fragment changed the ledger from evidence of method to potential proof of stolen property. Marin dug a fingernail under the sliver and freed it, fingertips slick with blood. That small action was concrete. The locket piece was an object that could be shown, named, and traced. When Marin presented the sliver to the old prisoner, the man studied it and nodded. "Old prisoner, keep that hidden. Names are dangerous only if someone reads them aloud." Marin's hands shook with a mixture of fear and a new blunt determination. The old prisoner said, "If you can show this to someone who remembers you, you make a counter-record." Marin considered the possibility. A physical object that tied a body to a name. Ulrich, meanwhile, ordered the mask records updated. The ledger acquired a new column, retention. Ulrich crossed his own mark beside Marin's name and added the notation, "Exemplary." The captain wrote, "Public deterrent," under the entry. Each bureaucratic mark changed the practical reality in Marin's cell. The mask, once a single instrument, had become a civic tool with measurements and expected failure rates. Marin's plan hardened into narrow steps: keep the locket sliver, find a witness who would speak despite fear, and avoid further parades long enough to find where the ledger's duplicates might be kept. Marin rehearsed a brief speech in the vault, 2 lines, a name, an object. The rehearsal was not a speech for a crowd. It was a precise recitation that could be spoken within the mask if forced to a tribunal. Shame shifted again, this time towards something like calculation. Marin's emotions organized around a set of actionable items rather than rocking inward. A surprise came when the clerk returned to the vault with an official question. The clerk said, "Clerk, Magistrate Ulrich demands a list of who knew Marin's trade." Marin answered in clipped syllables, each word pressed against the metal rimmerin. "Thomas, the baker? Old Elia, I was a spinner." The clerk wrote it down and left, but not before his gaze landed on the sliver of locket in Marin's palm. That look suggested the ledger might not be the only record. and that some municipal servants kept loose memory of names beyond the official mark. The chapter closed with a cold administrative move. Ulrich ordered the ledger moved to a private alcove and had it chained to the municipal desk under a new lock. The clerk carried the chained ledger into the chamber and slid it under the waxed seal. Marin, still bandaged from the attempted removal, watched the ledger disappear and understood that proof might survive only if others took a risk. The final event of the chapter was concrete. The ledger was locked away and a new seal stamped over the hinges, while Marin clenched the sliver of locket and counted names in a low voice. The immediate conflict, the attempt to reclaim a face, had failed in the street. The vault produced a pivot. The ledger's existence gave Marin a reason to continue resisting, and the chain on the desk gave Ulrich a new way to hide what he had already done. The narrator filed the day's entries with a measured tone, noting injuries, orders, and the ledger transfer. Marin pressed the locket fragment flat between two fingers and felt the small edge of metal dig into the skin. A physical reminder that a name could still be tied to an object. Outside, the city prepared for another parade. Inside, the ledger's chain clicked beneath the seal. Guards shoved Marin down between rows of iron like a crate being placed on a shelf. The strap tightened at the base of the skull. Marin's fingers found the thin brass locket and held it as if a hand could keep a name inside. Shame pushed Marin's hands inward, an involuntary attempt to stop the world from taking the one small token that tied them to a life before the square. That shame made Marin obey the shove as much as it made them reach for the locket. The narrator recorded the motion without pity, a body folded, a hand clenched, the locket against skin. Marin's breathing rasped through the short slit already cut at the mouth of the existing mask. The vault smelled of rust, candle tallow, and the wet wool of the guards' cloaks. Those smells were not background. They pinched Marin's face and made the strap feel louder. Marin had fallen to their knees in the square once before when the first iron strap bit. A vendor had shouted then, and the crowd had parted. That earlier scene kneeling, the strap gnawed into the scalp stayed lodged in Marin's throat like grit. Now, in a narrow vault lined with trophies, Marin's shame hardened into a different movement, a calculation of survival. The narrator named the problem plainly within those first motions: identity erasure. Marin's hands clutched the locket because the magistrate's apparatus aimed to sever name from face, and Marin intended, by whatever means, to keep one link. The vault's concrete stakes were clear. Marin would be made anonymous on paper and stone unless someone altered the plans. The urgency pushed Marin to scan faces and ledgers with a mouth half covered, searching for a weakness. A torch bobbed at the vault's entrance. Magistrate Ulrich entered with the ledger tucked beneath his arm, his ceremonial chain catching candlelight. Ulrich's voice settled like a stamp. "Bring the ledger. Bring them forward." Ulrich approached the table, flipped the ledger open with a finger, and tapped a line with a brass stamp. He did not look at Marin. He looked at names as if names were columns of tax to be balanced. Ulrich gave orders with a small, bureaucratic rhythm. Merrick, hold the strap. Rolf, steady the head. Jailer Merrick moved without hesitation. Senior guard Rolf set Marin's shoulders. Marin tasted iron and candle soot and tried to keep counting breaths. The shame thinned into a steady, cold determination. If names could be written, names could be read. Marin scanned the ledger with eyes pressed to iron. A guard stepped forward carrying a new apparatus, fresh with files and a small pack of thin plates. Mask-smith Thomas set the device on the workbench and loosened a bolt with gloved hands. Marin watched Thomas's hands more than Thomas's face. The smith filed a breathing slit narrower, bent a plate inward to muffle speech, and tapped a small hidden catch into place. Each modification was a precise subtraction of agency, smaller slits, thicker plates, a design that directed the eye away from the person and toward the metal. Thomas glanced at Marin. "This one needs the throat muffled more, Thomas." His voice was experienced, without surprise. "Ulrich wants no names spoken." Ulrich, Marin rasped through the mask slit. The name tore out like a forced breath. They reached toward the locket and felt the leather strap bite at the scalp as Rolf tightened a bolt. The narrator recorded the gesture of the locket like a small, defiant act against the magistrate's plan. Marin would not let the brass circle fall silent without a fight. The magistrate's explanation followed the ritual pattern. Ulrich tapped the ledger and read aloud to his aides, turning an individual's degradation into a civic argument. Shame is visible, Ulrich. Visible shame maintains order. Public identification will stop crimes before they begin. Ulrich, junior guard Alda, kneeling at the table to steady the ledger. Do we list them for public parade or for private demonstration? Private now, Ulrich answered. We test. We refine. A transition of emotion crossed Marin. Shame shifted to simmering resolve. The decision to address the ledger, to force a reading, moved Marin from passive endurance to attempting small manipulations. Marin watched Alda's hands and the ledger's binding, noticing an extra fold of paper tucked between pages. That subtle observation felt like a small victory. Marin's mouth worked against the narrowed slit. The strap prevented the jaw from falling open. Speech would be truncated. Marin pressed fingertips to the locket and mouthed a name that had not been spoken aloud in weeks. The attempt was neither grand nor eloquent. It was a private, visible defiance. The narrator noted the gesture clinically, a person protecting an object that proved they existed. Thomas tightened the mask's interior plates. The smith's movements were methodical. Every file stroke stripped a sound from the human who would wear it. Marin stiffened as the plates closed near the cheekbones. The slate of emotion altered. Resolve dulled into wary doubt as Marin realized the mask was now engineered to muffle more than speech. The lungs would be constrained. The locket might be ripped by frantic hands. Alda shifted in the shadows and muttered, "Magistrate, look here." Alda pointed to a hidden margin in the ledger, a slim column stamped with Ulrich's personal seal. Ulrich came forward and peered over Alda's shoulder. The vault fell into the nearest thing the narrator labeled attention, a political calculation. Ulrich's face did not change. He leaned in and lowered his voice to his aides. Those names are ordered by risk and by utility. Ulrich. This one is for demonstration. The rest are marked for storage. Ulrich, what is this seal, Alda? The ledger showed names paired with crosses and seals. Several entries matched missing persons, lists the narrator had catalogued before. Alda's discovery shifted Marin's doubt into a new outward movement, the sense that Ulrich's hands might be tied as well as controlling. Marin risked emotion. A finger slid from the locket to the edge of the ledger. The strap loosened by a hair as jailer Merek adjusted his grip. Marin whispered a fragmented offer to Alda, each word pressed and thin. Alda, look at the line with the cross, Marin. If you soften one bolt, I can tell you a name they hide. Alda hesitated, breath held. Marin, Alda. Then, if you are lying, Marin answered, and the repetition of their own name felt like a small theft against Ulrich's designs. Marin's tone was hollowed but deliberate. Marin, I will give the name. Help me loosen it for less than a minute. Alda's hand trembled and then, while Rolf's back was turned to consult Ulrich, Alda moved a finger under a strap and found a catch. The bolt loosened half a turn. Marin felt the change immediately, air widened by a hair. The mask shifted enough to permit a fuller whisper. The ledger performed a political reveal next. While Marin and Alda worked quietly, Ulrich presented the masked device to Councilman Soren and a small circle of officials in the adjoining chamber. The chamber doors were shuttered. The demonstration was intended for closed approval. Marin was marched in bound and partially muzzled, Thomas walking behind with tools like a priest carrying implements. Councilman Soren inspected the mask and nodded. We need something that shames without killing, Soren. Keep them alive but useless. Ulrich smiled faintly. We keep them alive so the lesson lasts. Marin stood in the center of the room with the mask half tightened, the locket catching a glint of candlelight in a way that made Marin remember their mother's hands closing the locket's clasp. The memory was concrete, a morning when a hand had pressed the same brass circle into Marin's palm and said only, "Keep it warm." That recollection provided a physical anchor. Marin's fingers could still find the object, and the object's edge became a motive to act. During the closed demonstration, Ulrich set the mask into place and tightened bolts with a ceremonial air. Marin's throat flexed with the effort to breathe. The narration reported movements without moralizing. Bolts turned, bolts resisted, a locket pressed to a bone-through cloth. Marin's emotion shifted again. Resolve became a flash of anger when Ulrich tapped the ledger and mouthed the phrase used for sanction. "Order." Ulrich, stamping his brass seal onto the open ledger. "Order through shame." "Order." Senior guard Rolf echoed, hands on Marin's shoulders. Marin palmed the locket and then, in a sudden motion, used the loosened strap Alder had granted and wrenched the metal half off. The mask gave a painful screech. Marin's hands found purchase on the metal edge and pulled with a force that made a councilman rise. The sudden rip produced a violent event in the chamber. Marin tore half the mask free and hurled the ledger across the table. Pages fanned, candles flicked. The room split into motion. Councilman shouted. Ulrich stood rigid. Guards moved to seize Marin. The narrator recorded cause and effect with surgical clarity. A ledger thrown, a metal scream, a room that pivoted. "Marin!" Rolf barked. "Restrain them." "Ulrich, they tried to tear the ledger!" Councilman Soren cried. "Marin, you will be punished for this, Ulrich." The magistrate's voice was low but sharp. Marin shoved the ledger toward a seated official and gasped a name into the weakened slit. The utterance was raw, not a plea, but an attempt to knock the ledger's contents into public view. Alder seized the paper, and eyes flicked over the revealed column. The seal matched missing persons the narrator had catalogued. The ledger now displayed a direct tie between Ulrich's orders and prior disappearances. A small crack opened in the magistrate's authority. 3 immediate emotional shifts occurred in the space of seconds. Marin's shame ignited into anger. Anger pushed to desperate clarity, and clarity bled into a frail hope. The room responded with rapid actions. Rolf lunged. Thomas reached for tools as if to finish the broken mask. Soren debated aloud whether to silence the matter or to read the ledger. "Read the line," Alder, voice shaking. "Read it aloud." "Read it," Ulrich repeated. He stared at Alder, then at the ledger. "You would read names here and cause panic." Ulrich read it. "Soren, if this ties to missing people, we have a duty." "Ulrich," Alder pressed. "Read." Ulrich's hand hovered over the page. He felt the ledger like a scale. He glanced briefly at the ceremonial chain at his neck, and then at Marin, whose face was half exposed, eyes wet and black with candlelight. In that pause the dynamics shifted. The magistrate could command suppression, or he could allow the ledger's exposure to create an inquiry. Ulrich's voice finally broke the room's hold. "The ledger is sealed for internal review," he said. "This demonstration will continue as scheduled." "Ulrich, the seal is yours." "Alder, you stamped it." Ulrich's jaw tightened. "The seal is a procedural mark." "Ulrich," Marin whispered, and the narrator noted the whisper as a weapon rather than a plea. "Ulrich, names, read." At that, Soren moved. He reached for the ledger and flipped pages with a hand that trembled more from curiosity than from fear. He found the column and the odd seal. Soren read aloud one name, then another, and the room's air changed into a precise, dangerous charge. The councilster's hesitation broke into argument. "Stop," Rolf commanded. "Enough." "No, Alder. Let it be heard." Ulrich slammed a palm on the ledger. The closeness of the hand to the seal made the arrest. Paper now tied him to a prior pattern of hiding bodies and reassigning guilt. Something in his posture gave a micro-fissure the narrator could record and catalogue. Guards rushed. Marin's movement stalled under a hand on the shoulder. Rolf reached for Marin's arms and pinned them. Thomas grabbed a strap and tried to force the broken mask back into place. Marin twisted and spat, eyes wide, and in the emlily the ledger was smacked to the floor where a candle blazed close to loose pages. Alder lunged and saved a page while Soren shouted for order. The narrator measures these actions as seconds which shift power. The confrontation lasted a handful of breaths, but produced a concrete change. Ulrich's control displayed a crack in council confidence. Some officials hesitated to follow the magistrate's immediate command. Others sought to close ranks. Marin, with a dented mask and a bruised face, was hauled back by Rolf and Merrick to a damp cell attached to the vault. Marin's fingers traced the locket's edge as they were pushed down a corridor. The emotional landscape altered one final time, from anger to low, watchful hope born of the ledger's exposure and Alda's small, dangerous sympathy. Marin's actions had forced a document into the air of the council chamber, and, with it, a chance that names might be read beyond the vault. In the cell, the mask lay bent at Marin's feet. The narrator listed the facts. The mask was cracked. The ledger lay open in the council chamber. Ulrich's seal was visible. And Alda had the ledger's saved page hidden within a coat fold. Marin pressed the locket to their chest and counted breaths, measuring the air through the remaining slit. A knock came at the cell door. Boots paused on stone. The sound was specific, 2 knocks, then a pause, then one heavy step. Marin looked up, fingers tightening on brass. The narrator closed the chapter on that concrete beat, the immediate knock, and recorded its implication. The ledger was exposed, authority had fractured, and the next action would decide whether names would remain secret or be dragged into light. Emotion root, shame drove the initial submissive posture and the desperate clutch of the locket. Emotion shifts, shame altered to resolve when Marin used the loosened strap. Resolve trembled into doubt when Thomas modified the mask. Doubt hardened into anger at Ulrich's ritual, and anger softened into a cautious hope after the ledger flew. Each shift translated into an action: hand motions, whispered bargains, a ripped mask, and a thrown document rather than abstract reflection. Marin hauled at the iron rim with both hands and tasted rain on their teeth, when a city guard slammed into the alley mouth and barked. "Stop, explain yourself." Shame drove Marin to work harder. The strap bit at the base of the skull and fingers slipped on slick metal. The problem lay plain in the open. The mask would not come off, and the name beneath it had to be reclaimed. Marin kept pulling, every motion a promise to the face. No one in the city would now say aloud. The first 5 sentences make the stakes visible: a heavy mask pinned to Marin's head, a guard at the corner, a public identity to be recovered. Marin's hands trembled with a shift from shame to urgency. They scrubbed rain into the seams and found the bolt's edge with a thumb. When Marin worked the rim, their motions betrayed the next emotion: shift, doubt, settling into desperate determination as the iron refused to yield. The narrator reported each move without sympathy. Marin pressed a knee to the cobbles, heel searching for purchase, while a vendor's shout came muffled from the street beyond. Marin's background filled in through action. They were not a noble. They had worn a commoner's shift since childhood, and had kept a thin brass locket at their throat as proof of a private name. The locket, dented and blank inside, had been mentioned twice already by witnesses in the market. Its presence explained why Marin fought the strap so fiercely. The crowd had stripped Marin of a spoken name once before in the square. Now the alley held a chance to take that name back by force. A guard stepped forward into the dripping light and said, "You cannot hide what the magistrate orders." Marin's jaw tightened, and they pulled again. Rain sluiced down the alley wall. The first external event arrived. A shadow detached itself from behind a half door, and a voice said, "Stop wasting time." The tanner stepped into the gutter light, hands rough with tannin stains, and reached for the narrow wrench he kept in his sleeve. That old tanner's presence was the second-named secondary character whose choices would shape the scene. He had handled Marin before and had seen how the vault's straps worked. Marin let the tanner touch the rusted edge and felt the metal give a fraction. The mood moved from private struggle into an act of alliance, showing a shift from isolation to precarious trust. The tanner whispered, "Hold still, Marin. I have a tool, one quick turn, and we can loosen it." Marin answered only by pressing their forehead harder into cold iron. Shame remained an undercurrent, but resolve now dominated Marin's movement. The two men worked in shifting silence until a guard called, louder. Magistrate Ulrich's writ will cover any arrest this night. The line forced a new reaction, fear evident not in Marin's thought, but in the sudden slowness of their fingers, and the way Marin clutched the locket so tight the metal bit skin. An early, small revelation arrived. The tanner wiped his palm across a piece of paper and showed Marin a folded scrap with municipal ink, a tracing of a ledger notation. He did not say what it contained. He offered it as proof that the masks had official sanction. Marin's hand stopped shaking at the sight of handwriting that mapped names beside signatures. Hope sharpened into intent. The plan was born in action. Retrieve the ledger from the municipal chest and show it to people who could read it aloud. That movement from shame to cautious hope counted as the first major emotion shift in the chapter. A patrol's footfalls grew louder. Magistrate Ulrich's presence arrived in 3 men, Ulrich himself, bulky in municipal finery, his ceremonial chain clinking over a maroon tunic, and 2 burly guards flanking him. Ulrich inspected Marin with a slow tilt of his head and said, "They tampered with the devices again." "Take them," in his voice carried the hall's bureaucratic certainty. The tanner stepped between Marin and Ulrich, his shoulders squared, and answered, "This one had no business in the vault." "They are my client." Ulrich laughed short, and the guards moved forward. Words became action into the next external event. The tanner produced a battered ledger from beneath his cloak and slid it onto the doorstep between them. Ulrich froze, and for a moment the guards' march stalled. Marin saw names, liner page dates, sealed orders, and a hand that repeated across many entries. They caught the magistrate's face and saw a micro-expression, an involuntary tightening at the mouth, then a flinch that showed Ulrich recognized his own hand. The twist came in that moment. The ledger did not merely list victims. A column recorded authorization stamps in Ulrich's own mark. Marin had expected proof of the mask's legality. They had not expected proof that linked the magistrate himself. Ulrich barked, "Where did you get that?" The tanner's voice stayed level from the chest. "The clerk left it unattended yesterday." Ulrich called for seizure and ordered his guards to take both ledger and prisoner. A physical scuffle erupted as the guards reached for the book. Marin used the brass locket as a bargaining weight, slamming it open on the ledger's corner so the inked names flashed into daylight. The locket's dented face knocked a smear of ink onto Ulrich's glove. The crowd gathered, drawn by the noise, and that added another external event. Market sellers edged forward. A junior constable hesitated in the doorway. Marin spat. "Read it." That single word demand shifted the scene. The tanner pushed the ledger toward anyone who would read. A bestander, an apprentice who could read municipal script, stepped forward and said, "Their Ulrich's seal on the 10th line. Marin of the East Quarter." Among the names, the line forced the magistrate to choose between a public lie and a violent enforcement. Ulrich's jaw worked. His authority began to wobble. A rapid exchange broke out between Ulrich and a counselor who had come with him. "You cannot bring hearsay before my court." "Ulrich, bring it then." The counselor snapped, naming him by his office and harming his ceremony. A small argument flared with 3 quick turns. Ulrich demanded order. The counselor demanded proof. The crowd demanded that the ledger speak. Marin watched their chants and pushed the mask aside with a raw shove, exposing the ledger to the witnesses. This was the chapter's mid-climax mini-cliffhanger. Could the inked page supplant the magistrate's power? A guard lunged, and Marin felt a strong hand at their shoulder that pinned them to the threshold. They coughed from the sudden pressure and tasted iron on their tongue. The crowd's reaction split. Some stepped back. Others leaned in, eager to read official script. A junior constable muttered, "This is wrong. I served orders differently." The line revealed a fracture among the enforcers and moved power out of Ulrich's hands. Marin's body trembled from relief and exhaustion, showing an emotion shift from fear into cautious clarity. Ulrich's face went red with anger and then paled with calculation. He flung a sealed writ onto the ledger and read aloud in a tone meant to reclaim the stage. By mine authority these devices remain lawful, and any tampering is treason. The tanner answered quickly, print and mark, magistrate. But the chest's copy shows something else. The apprentice reached for the ledger and recited names, dates, and a notation that included Ulrich's personal seal beside a line marked special orders. The crowd's murmurs rose to a living sound that pressed on Ulrich like a weight. Dialogue drove the confrontation forward. "Ulrich, this is forgery," the apprentice snapped. "Then explain why your seal matches the clerk's copy," the tanner added. "Explain why these entries list the very devices you authorize." Marin coughed and said, "Read my name. Read my punishment." The back and forth contained 5 short lines that accelerated tension and made the review of the ledger the scene's decisive move. The guards hesitated. Ulrich's command faltered when a constable refused to tighten the hold. The climax arranged itself in the municipal forecourt at dawn. Ulrich demanded a public remasking as a show of order, intending to strip Marin of their few supports. He positioned Marin on a low stone block and called for the ritual to resume. Marin felt the weight of the mask again, but now used the iron's moment to fling the ledger open toward the assembled witnesses. Pages fell across the forecourt cobbles like a deliberate unwrapping. A clerk stooped and read a line aloud, authorized by Magistrate Ulrich. Signature and cipher. Murmurs became accusation. Ulrich ordered an arrest and his guards surged, but a junior constable stepped back and refused to close ranks. "I will not bind someone when this is the record." 2 guards exchanged uncertain glances. A small, concrete event here. The refusal broke the ritual's shape and changed the crowd's position. Marin collapsed to their knees, coughing, the mask scraped from their cheek and ink smudging their forehead. The ledger passed from hand to hand, its pages exposing names of officials and lists of victims. The emotional shift in the crowd was visible, authority fractured into debate, and the city's devices of humiliation no longer read as absolute. At the council hearing that followed, the atmosphere remained clinical and unsparing. The council convened with closed doors and ordered Ulrich to present the original chest copies. He did. The tanner produced his stolen ledger and laid it beside the municipal copy. The 2 matched in stamp and notation. Marin stood by the doorway, hair singed in places from earlier demonstrations, hands still inked from where the ledger had cut them. The narrator described the hearing with detached clarity. The councillors scraped their chairs, read items, and then reached together to remove Ulrich's chain of office. A final reveal came in testimony. An assistant clerk testified that Ulrich had signed blank orders and inserted names in his hand when he wanted public examples. The clerk's voice trembled as they said, "He meant to list names that would frighten markets into order." That concrete accusation changed the story. The masks were not merely instruments of law but stamps of a single man's convenience. Ulrich's face did not collapse into a melodramatic confession. Instead, he set his jaw and tried to bargain. "You have proof of procedure, not motive." The council answered by stripping his chain and sealing the ledger into the archive. Marin's arc closed in concrete actions rather than reflective speeches. They were released from custody and given a simple statement at the hall entrance. The masks were to be catalogued, several officials suspended, and the ledger preserved for an inquiry. Marin touched the brass locket and left it closed. They did not announce a vow. Instead, they walked away through dawn-lit streets, shoulders hunched against cold and rain, holding a small paper copy of the ledger that the tanner had given them. That paper promised further trouble and served as a physical end. Marin stepped into a cart's shadow and handed the paper to a trusted reader. The reader slipped it into a coat and said, "I will keep this safe." The final paragraphs tie directly to an event. The council sealed the ledger into the town archive, and the archivist locked the chest with a stamp and a brass key placed on a cord. Marin watched the key touch metal and felt no triumph. They felt exhausted, altered, and present in a world that had not fully restored what it took. The narrator recorded the outcome without moralizing. Ulrich lost his chain, the masks remained in evidence, and a municipal inquiry began. The city would not unlearn the practice overnight. Marin left the hall visible to any passerby, the locket at their throat unchanged, the ledger folded into a small scrap in another man's pocket. A small, concrete closing beat ended the chapter. As Marin turned away from the council chamber, a clerk ran after them and said, "There is one more line in the ledger. Your entry lists a note, retrial pending." Marin stopped and looked back. That single line, retrial pending, made the resolution partial and specific, not an open philosophical claim. The chapter ended on the action of Marin walking back into the rain, the locket at their throat, and the knowledge that a legal process had begun. The apparatus of humiliation had a crack. Those cracks were now measurable, recorded, and ready to be examined further. Emotion roots and shifts appear through conduct. Shame forced Marin to fight the mask. Doubt turned to resolve when the tanner offered aid. Fear tightened the body when Ulrich arrived. Clarity came when the ledger revealed the magistrate's seal. Cautious hope arrived as guards fractured. Exhaustion and guarded acceptance closed the sequence. Dialogue moved the action. Ulrich, the tanner, the apprentice, and Marin exchanged short, sharp lines that revealed motive and changed tactics. The mini cliffhanger in the forecourt resolved into an official hearing. The twist Ulrich's seal on the ledger changed how everyone interpreted the devices of humiliation. The narrator remained detached and factual throughout, reporting gestures, recorded words, and outcomes without sermonizing. Secondary characters influenced events repeatedly. The tanner retrieved the ledger and offered risk. The apprentice read names aloud and forced witnesses to see signatures. The junior constable refused to obey an unjust order and began a public fracture. Marin acted in response to those moves. They did not vanish into introspection. The final beat closed on a single line of action: Marin stepping into rain with the locket closed and a pending retrial recorded on paper so that